Negation speakers rise. Ancheta, you have the floor.
I thank the chair.
Good morning again. This is Senator Jason Ancheta speaking for the second time this legislative session. For all the judges in the room, please give me a thumbs up when you're ready for me to begin speaking. All right, awesome. Is that everyone on this side? Okay. And then everyone on this side, Mr. Chair and Parliamentarian.
Always ready.
Awesome. And then my colleagues, you guys are good? Mr. Bergeron, time is money. That's why this Congress needs to revisit the MCU and once again call upon a specific item. This time, we look to Dr. Strange's Eye of Agamotto, in which we have the Time Stone. But specifically, because this Congress, when looking at today's legislation, F2, the 12 Carrier Act, doesn't have time to waste. We cannot continue debating about something that isn't going to help us in the long run, specifically these aircraft carriers. It's because of this that we're going to use Dr. Strange's Time Stone to look at the future and see how we're going to be hurting because we continue investing in this effort. But then we'll also turn the Time Stone back, and we'll find that because of the problems that we currently deal with, we find out that any benefits that come about because of these aircraft carriers are only going to be negated in the long run. So it's because of this that I implore all of the senators in this chamber to stand in opposition to this piece of legislation. So first, let's turn our time stone forward to see how we're going to be losing money in the future by continuing to fund this project. Because we refer to Mr. Justin Backman when he reports as the Bloomberg Aviation and Aerospace Fellow on June 28th of 2017. When you look beyond the question of how much the fielding needs, you find that with these aircraft carriers specifically, you have at roughly $13 billion going into this effort. But then furthermore, that the USS Gerald Ford is currently, as it is, the Navy's priciest ship and arrives with critical performance as of right now, with the kinks that contractors are currently working to remedy by 2019. But that's problematic, senators, because when we look at the legislation, specifically looking at Section 4, this says that this legislation takes place immediately. Whereas if we know that under the status quo, we find out that contractors haven't fixed the kinks that are currently present with the problems in these aircraft carriers, then ultimately you're going to be shooting this Congress in the foot as well as its constituency by passing today's legislation. Because, Mr. Bergeron, in an effort to make this Congress stronger, you're only going to be compromising us in the long run. But it's not just that. We also look towards Mr. Scott Paltrow, who's a financial journalist with Reuters magazine. He reports on March 9th of 2017 that when you look at the Gerald R. Ford alone, it's $2.5 billion over the budget. So yes, I know that you guys are going to come up here on the affirmation and tell me that I'm too obsessed with money. But when we start looking towards these efforts, this could be invested in other things. And that's why when we start looking towards Mr. Bergeron's arguments, that brings us to where we need to turn the clock back and look at what the harms have done in the past and why we need to not invest in these aircraft carriers. This time we report to former Jane Defense Weekly's U.S. Maritime correspondent, Mr. Sam Legrone, and the U.S. Naval Institute. They report on March 27, 2017, that currently, as you start looking towards these aircraft carriers, we actually don't need these, because currently, naval leaders from the UK, France, and the U.S. signed trilateral cooperation agreements that will allow the three navies to work more closely together, meaning that especially in the realms of submarine warfare and carrier operations for maritime worldwide security, you find out that in the long run, we don't need these because we're going to be using other navies as well. So it's because of this cooperation that specifically when the first speaker in cross-examination asked you, Mr. Bergeron, when we start looking towards specifically the international community, we not only solve for that, but then we also solve for this. So it's the end game.